I know there are a lot of people talking about songwriting, and how many have been to seminars or read books, and you're starting to kind of hear the same things over and over again when it comes to songwriting tools and strategies. So we got the hook, we got the, say what you really want to say, we got the song structures, the typical song forms. There's words that keep coming up, themes that keep coming up. My interest in hopefully meeting where your inspiration is calling for you to attend something like this is to try to understand what your personal struggle is with your songwriting. And that could be, why do you seem to be writing the same songs over and over again? Why do you have trouble tying up a chorus? Why do you feel like your songs are 4 minutes and 20 seconds long and you can't get them shorter? Why do you feel like you don't really have anything to say? Or that lyrically, the feedback you keep getting over and over again is that people are like, yeah, that's nice. Or they have trouble distinguishing one song from another. They don't really know what you're trying to say. Musically, why do you keep writing around the same tempo, the same grooves? Do you feel limited instrumentally with what you're doing? So what I'd love for you to do is to think about, I'm going to give you time in this workshop to do so, but think about what are your own unique issues that you're dealing with right now that if you were able to overcome that one or two things, you would noticeably be writing more memorable songs, or songs that leave an impact rather than just another of your songs. All right, so my method for doing that was to very confidently, let's say arrogantly, try to title this thing 5 Tools of Songwriting That Change Everything. There's a lot of tools of songwriting that change everything, and I'm going to tell you 5 that I think are the primary places I look in my own songs when I have this feeling that there might be an issue, or when I'm trying to analyze other songs for what makes them truly effective. Within each of these 5 things, there will be sort of subtopics, and I will tell you what those are, but I've tried to narrow it down to something that's reasonable too, because I don't know about you, but when I write a song, I'm trying to manage so many different parts. It's overwhelming. I think the idea is that we're here at this expo to be inspired and find a way to connect what we feel is quality, creative expression to the people who need it, and we feel their lives are going to be enriched with it. And so that assumes, I think, that you know what is enriching about your songs. What do you feel is a strength about what you do now? And when I say songs, I'm coming at it from a perspective of take away the production, take away the hot track, put it over there. What have you got that's melody, rhythm, harmony, and lyric? So I'd like you to think for a moment, what do you do that you feel is a strength with one or more of those 4 elements? If you had trouble identifying a strength, you might think back to what kinds of feedback you get from people, not your mom, but musicians, people who are able to verbalize in musical terms like you are, what might be shining through. And, think about your personality too. How is your personality reflected in the songwriting that you put out there? Now, I'd like you to look at the other side of that coin and think about what's a weakness. Where do you tend to lack when it comes to either maybe your process gets difficult, maybe it's a particular part of the song that you're writing that becomes challenging. Maybe it's a lack of contrast. Maybe you feel limited harmonically. Maybe you've said everything by the end of the first chorus and you have nowhere to go. Think about what is what's lacking from your songs or your process. There's a lot to say when you ask, what's my weakness? And I think that's a wonderful thing to be able to say and identify, if I could really look at my songs and trust my instinct, here's where they're Here's what's not shining. And I think if you look at all of our songs as you know, each song is going to carry strengths. It's going to carry things that it emphasizes, stuff that is really working for it, things that it's capitalizing on. And if you can look at your own songs and your songwriting style and recognize that it's not for everybody, but it is for some people, and identify why that is some serious power. And one thing I wanted to do then is go through these 5 tools and see if you can connect that strength that you have to one of the 5 or several of them that I'll be touching on, and also that weakness to one of these so you can identify where you might need to focus. You know, I think the thing that I just mentioned was trusting your instinct. I think so many times as a songwriter, I am putting myself in a position of someone else telling me, is it good? Do you like it? Can you use it? You know, and it's really, I think works against me at times because it means, okay, you tell me what's wrong with my song, but you have a sense. And I think part of the value in, again, taking these courses, you're in an environment where you become empowered with the tool so that you can self-correct, you can analyze, and you have a feeling in you. If you've been doing this for any length of time, you have a feeling. You need to give that voice some space to speak. So let's start from the top. We all know that repetition is important if we want people to be able to sing our song. We can't just have a melody, in terms of repetition and melody, that has no sense of meter, no sense of repetitive rhythm, and no sense of repeating pitches. There's no pattern, there's nothing to remember. And so there's also nothing to identify the song by. So what I'm going to assert in these 5 tools is that there are tendencies that can inform us as to what level of commercial viability you already go for or that you appreciate, and how you might want to use that information to craft your own songs. My 4-year-old, now I believe that I fill our house with good music. At least this is my alternate reality. But he goes around singing, I just want to shake, 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 dun, 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 dun. And it's like, oh. Now, I appreciate the repetition of commercially viable music, and I strive to involve repetition in my own music. I have nothing against Taylor Swift, nothing against the songs that use repetition to that extent. And I think a broader idea, though, is to say, how am I going to use that idea of repetition as a template for what I love, you know? Not as this is what I have to do or should do, but how can I use that information to boldly go forth into the music I want to create? And I think I listed some song examples on the handout that you can look to recall what we've talked about in this session. I would encourage you to grab songs from the music you love and look for each of these characteristics. So commercially viable music, in other words, memorable songs in and of themselves, the songs that are truly memorable, have a melodic motif. A motif is that small, common denominator that just repeats throughout the song. And it's a rhythmic and a series of pitch, those 2 elements that create the melody. If you can't identify what that is in your own song, then you have an issue with memorability. If I can't sing your melody, then, maybe we have an issue at least in understanding, well, what is the melody trying to assert? What's it trying to be? So one thing that I noticed, I was examining this common complaint, I guess, commercial music these days, it's so repetitive and meh. And I was thinking, well, let me take some of the iconic songs that I know and love and see about that. How does the repetition hold up? And is that what kind of creates this disdain for this top 40 stuff? And so I thought, okay, Stand By Me. Love that song. Who doesn't like that song, really? I've never heard anyone say, God, I hate that song, Stand By Me. So, and Lean on Me. You know, apparently we have to write a hit song with me, the end of the title with 3 words. Beatles, Get Back. It's a fun song, I like that. Tom Petty, Free Fallin', I always hear that one. You know, and countless more, but that melodic motif is so identifiable. So the first thing you might look for in your songs, do you have a melodic motif? Is it repeated several times in the first section of the song? And each section will have its own melodic motif. Many times what songwriters will do, and I've done this as well, is you'll write a very long melody. And then you'll vary it a little bit the next line. And then by the 3rd line, you're onto a new melody. And it's like, well, that's not repetition. Now, again, that's not the tendency of easily memorable songs. The tendency is a short melody, you know, like, hello, you know what song I'm singing, right? All I said was 1 word and 2 notes. But these other songs, you know, sometimes in our lives, you know, how simple is that? Dun, 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 very straight melody, goes up, and then it goes down, you know, and the word is just some. Time. Like, how often have you written a melody where it's that short, where it's just 1 word isolated? And I think the key to walk away with here is rest space. Do you give your listener rest space? Try writing a melody like that, just for the sake of it. And, you know, you'll educate yourself, too, on, that's funny. I do that longer thing. That's okay, too. But then, own it. That's what I do. I do the longer phrase thing. And it's part of what makes me, me. But then, get real, you know? How easily is it going to be for us to remember it? Maybe for you, you've got a you're an artist. You're not trying to get other people to sing your songs and be able to sing them. You actually sing very well, and you captivate your audience because of many strengths that you have. So I'm not saying that your melodies have to be short. They have to repeat, and they have to follow that simple structure. Not at all. But it's something to look at, to try to establish what do you do that's truly your own, and then examine how that holds up. So the next thing, that's number 1, melodic motif. The next thing is contrast. When you have a clearly defined melodic motif that you are repeating, what that means is it's easier to write the chorus section that contrasts with that. Have you ever had that trouble? You get to the chorus and you have this sense that you want it to be something. There's something great that it can be, but you've tried a number of different things and it just doesn't seem to be complementing the verse, doing something different enough. You might look to that. Did I clearly distinguish a melody in the verse so that I can do something different in the next section? Again, if you look at highly commercial music, there's huge contrast between the sections, which comes from a clearly distinguished motif to begin with. So we'll often find that we can create contrast through 3 different ways. So melody, harmony, lyric, certainly rhythm is a part of this. But I put down 5 melody. There's 5 basic melodic ways to create contrast. The phrase length. So the length of your melodic motif, do you sing all the way through that first line and it's 2 measures long? Or is it 1 measure long? Or is it 2 beats out of a 4-beat measure? So we'll often hear commercial music go from a 2 measure long phrases in the verse to a little pre-chorus where it has dun, 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 dun. Short, lots of rest space, very short phrases. So that then you can go back and create contrast again in the chorus with long melodic phrases again. Again, that's the tendency of highly commercial music. Note length, big one. I'm standing on a bridge. I'm waiting in the dark. Short notes, right? And then in the chorus, dun, dun, da, 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 long notes, right? So
again, highly commercial music has huge contrast. That's a very, very easy one to deal with, and just recognize, okay, one day a activity that you could give yourself as a songwriter is to say, I'm going to try to write extreme contrast. The greater the contrast, sometimes the more memorable the sections will be, the more refreshed we will feel. So you could say, I'm going to write a short note verse down here in pitch and a long note chorus up here in pitch. And you just use two very typical and effective contrasting elements to do that. Pitch, I just talked about. Again, a highly commercial way of doing things would be lower pitch in the verse, higher pitch in the chorus. A tendency, certainly not something that you have to adhere to. Position. This is a really big one, and it's so subtle. Get back. So is Jojo was a man who thought he was a loner. So where did I start that? Jojo. It's on the downbeat, right? Highly commercial songs change where the melodic phrase begins at the beginning of each song section. Notice how the chorus is 2, 3. Get back. Get back. So you will find this over and over and over again in highly commercial music. There will be a change in where the phrase starts. Now, if you layer these techniques, if you not only start your melodic motif in a different beat of the measure, and we generally, you can even, if you don't speak theory, which is fine for a songwriter, generalize it. Say, well, I'm feeling this very on that. It's like starts when I start playing. And I'm feeling this other one is like I sing and then I play. So it's before the measure starts. Or it seems like I always play and then I sing. Which is another tendency you might notice, that with you tend to go back to your typical ways of writing. And so you play and then you sing. And if you notice every section is like this, man, it's hard to work against that and write what you feel is a very catchy, hooky, or commanding our attention once again, chorus. Because you're making choices without thinking that are slowly shutting doors of opportunity. So when you can keep those ideas in mind, then you have more control over that idea of contrast. And then the last thing I said was shape. And if we look at the shape of songs here, as far as the melody goes, we'll often be able to generalize those too. In Lean on Me, sometimes in our lives we all have pain. We all have sorrow. It's do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, da-da-da-da-da. So if you take out some staff paper or just whatever way you want to do this, map out your melody. I like to do it in terms of making lines. The shorter the line, the shorter the note. And then it just shows the shape. Really doesn't matter what exact pitches you're singing, I think, as far as a melody goes. Map out the shape. When you get to the contrasting section, if you notice, you've got lean on me when you're not strong. If it's all the same, then we have a problem. I think there's a reason it's lean on me when you're not strong. It's a different shape. It's an octave up too, which helps create contrast through pitch. Okay, more on contrast. Harmony, certainly we don't want to dwell on melody the entire time, particularly if you tend to have a talent in harmony and groove, and that's where you solve your problems as far as songs go. Many times I find that as songwriters, we're constantly like, what chord can I go to? It's all about, I don't know enough chords, give me chords. And if I think about some of my favorite songs, it's not as if they're just loaded with the more complex the chords, the more I like the song. No. So it's simplicity, right? Repetition. Once again, just like melodic motif, you have to establish what it is before you can contrast with what it is. And so beware of things like using too many different chords in a single section. There's beauty in simplicity. Songwriters who know more chords than I know, and artists, Stevie Wonder, John Mayer, I mean, they're commercial and memorable and what I believe very beautiful songs often rely on very simple chord structures, maybe until we get to a bridge where you can break it out and really take us somewhere else. But again, you have to establish what it is. So what does that mean? Talking not just abstractly, but maybe that means that you look at your own songs and you realize, again, you're involving a lot of different chords in a single section. So if you think about that, well, how do I contrast with that? If I've already kind of provided this movement in the verse, it's hard to contrast. What if you challenged yourself to write a one chord groove in the verse, and that's all you could do? Boy, there'd be a lot of places to go for your next section, right? What if it was a two chord groove? Another thing, though, to think about is how frequently do you change chords? And often, as songwriters, again, if we're holding our guitar in our hand or playing piano or something, we're relying on what comes naturally. So those are our tendencies. And if our tendency is to change chords every measure, you can imagine you're probably playing about the same tempo as you typically do. That's going to close off doors of opportunity again. It's going to prompt you to sing at the same rate, and then all of your songs begin to have those same elements. So look at how you might be able to access the idea of chord frequency. How about changing chords 2 times per measure and see what that does to create a new groove for yourself? So I think chord frequency is interesting. Also with contrast then, if you change chords twice a measure in your verse, I mean, man, if you do that for the whole song, that's going to be a one frantic chord-heavy tune. Maybe then in the pre-chorus, you change once per measure. And then you go back in the chorus to your initial feel. Look for how you're using contrast. And again, hold that up to songs you love and how they use chords. And honestly, if transcribing a song in terms of what chords are they using, if that very idea prevents you from ever sitting down and doing it, don't worry about what chords are being played. Map out how frequently the chords change. Get yourself some staff paper and make a little mark every beginning of the measure where a chord changes. And then you begin to see that structure, how that's playing out. Contrast as far as lyric. There's wonderful tools to designing the content of our lyric and making sure that we get contrast in that way too. So the chorus delivers the main message. So we often have more big thought, feeling, telling, summarizing language there, which contrasts with verses where we tend to say, here's the detail, here's what really happened, here's a small moment that proves that that big thought that I'm saying is true and real. So there's contrast in the way that we deal with lyric. The third idea, repetition. Okay, again, when and how much? Have you ever taken a song that you really love by another artist and mapped out how often the title phrase or where the title phrase occurs? Or if there's repetition within the language, for example, how do you complete phrases? Does line 1 complete the phrase with line 2, and that's a full sentence? Noticing things like that, consistencies in the language, always starting with the verb and finishing the thought, can be a wonderful way to make your lyric easier to take in. We should always read your lyric out loud and make sure that it's understandable. I'm not saying that it should read like a story, certainly not all lyric does that. But if we're asking our listener to sort of be a detective and finish it off and add the pronouns and add the prepositions and conjunctions, it's very, very hard to do that while we're experiencing all the information musically that's coming at us. Don't ask your listener to fill in the blanks. Say what you mean. Harmony and groove, number 4. I talked about tempo and how sitting down with your instrument, you might predispose yourself to sort of starting with those same tempos, which results in the same groove, the same frequency with which you're changing chords, and those unconscious decisions are resulting in a style that's wonderful, that's you, But if that's all you're doing as an artist, that gets frustrating. One exercise we have in a course called Writing from the Title is we choose a title, and then throughout the week, songwriters will set that title at different tempos. And at first, that sounds, okay, I don't know if that's particularly interesting or not. But by the end of the week, man, some huge realizations come out. Some of them are certainly that, wow, I just assumed the title needed to be at a particular tempo, and the song developed from there. But when we try it at slower tempos or vastly faster tempos, we start to think about things that title can mean that we never thought before. So that can be a really cool technique, but that's one thing that I mean by tempo. Instrumental groove, you always choose the same groove. I recently went in and got real about my own lack of vocabulary when it came to guitar. And so I went on a mad search to try to find, what can I do about that? I think just facing those issues is overwhelming. There's so much to do as a songwriter that it's hard to know what to farm out and what to do yourself. But I think as a writer, that was a major area where I was not inspired. Had to figure out what to do. Chord frequency, we talked about that, and there's some song examples there. Lyric, when it comes to lyric, many times sensory lyric writing, having the ability to write with a sensory element, so taste, touch, sight, sound, smell, and movement, is some serious power as a writer. Many times we will say, well, I'm not trying to write country music, because we often use that kind of language in country. It's all over the place, though. Pop, hip hop, huge in hip hop. It's presented a little differently, but it's all there. And when you have the capacity to write with highly sensory language, you know then when you're going to say something more generalized or thought-feeling, it's actually good language, and it really belongs there.